Hi guys, welcome back. Now in this video, we're going to be discussing all the factors that affect price elasticity of supply. We've already covered what PES is, and this video we're going to be learning what are the reasons that make a supply inelastic or what are the reasons that make a supply elastic. Now, ideally when we say that supply is inelastic, okay fine. Technically we are saying that quantity supplied responds proportionately less to price changes, while elastic supply means that quantity supplied responds proportionately more to price changes. But deep down, what we're saying is that if the supply is elastic and the PES is less than 1, then producers are finding it hard to actually increase supply. And technically, they can't really increase supply by that much, right? That's what PES and being inelastic means. But elastic supply means that producers are not going to have any hard time increasing supply. They can easily do so. They can easily increase the supply given the rise in prices being offered to them. That is exactly what makes supply responsive in the case when the supply is elastic, while we say that supply is not responsive or less responsive when supply is inelastic. So, what are the main influences that affect PES? So, the first and foremost is availability of resources. Straight up, the more resources I have, the more factors of production I have, at my disposal, the more easily I can increase supply. So, for example, if let's say if I am a tailor and I have, I stitch clothes, then the more labor I have, the more sewing machines, which are simply capital, I have, the more shops I have, the more resources I have, the more factors of production I have, the more clothes I can make, and the more customer demands I can cater. Which simply means, since I am a tailor, so my supply is the number of clothes that I will end up stitching. That is the number of services or the quantity of the services that I'm actually giving. So, the more resources would mean that my supply would be elastic. Second thing is, guys, the second factor is that the time taken to produce, right? So, if the product can be made quickly and swiftly, then supply is likely to be elastic. While if it takes long time to make a product, then it may not be easy to sort of, change the quantity supplied quickly, and supply would is likely to be more inelastic, right? So how long will it take to make this product or make supply this product? So if the product can be made quickly, supply would be elastic. If it takes a very long time to make the product, it will not be easy to change the quantity supplied given a rise in price, and hence supply is likely to be inelastic. And that is why we'll also see, usually see that the supply of agricultural products is likely to be inelastic because they have fixed growing and harvesting periods, right? That is why agricultural products are tend to be inelastic in supply, because it takes time for fruit and vegetables and agricultural output to grow and harvest. Same is the case for livestock. Like, it takes time for to livestock to sort of especially livestock farmers who breed livestock. It takes time for sort of a small baby goat to be turned into a full adult goat and then be chopped off for meat and or just simply be sold off in the market, right? So time taken to produce is technically the second, or another factor that we need to sort of look into, and that is what makes the supply as elastic or inelastic. So the less the time that is taken to produce, whether it's a manufactured product, or let's say it's something that you're breeding, or something that, or the services that you're offering, the more the time taken to sort of produce something, the more inelastic the supply would be. So, for example, let's say if I apply this on my own teaching thing, then I could say that, for example, if let's say someone comes to me towards the end, and there's just a month, there's just a month left, or something like that, and I'm like, what, I don't have the time for this right now. Or let's say, even if I end up teaching you, in the end it will take me a lot of time and a lot of hours and a lot of effort to actually make you understand economics. So I'm sorry, I can't really do a good job. Then I can't really teach you, because it's going to take a lot of time to actually teach you, because you're joining me in the end, and it's going to take a lot of time to understand you, make you understand concepts, right? And so supply would be inelastic towards the end, right? Because it's going to take a long time to finish the course as well, because I'll need to put in so many extra hours, and frankly we don't have that much time as well. So this is a concept that we're actually applying here. The third thing that we need to also understand is another factor, that is the simply the cost of altering, I mean, the cost of altering supply. And the cost of altering supply means that, let's say altering supply means changing supply. So how what is my cost, and how would it cost me to increase supply? So let's say, if okay, fine, if the demand goes up and if I am being offered more prices, right? If I am being offered higher prices for something and if the demand is going up, then I should technically increase supply. But how much does it cost me to increase supply? Like, do I have the money? So if the production of if the production involves the use of expensive capital equipment, or the production involves the use of labor that is very specialized in nature and it requires to be highly paid, if the labor is of a very specialized nature, write that down, labor of a specialized nature, that would be highly paid, then it would drastically increase my cost, and firms wouldn't really be likely. I mean, firms would want to review it very carefully, whether do they really, is it really feasible to increase supply right now or not. And this may make the supply relatively inelastic. But the lower the cost of altering supply, I mean, it's just, maybe it's not going to cost us to increase more output, because neither it requires expensive equipment. In fact, we already have equipment, and even if you want to go for new equipment, the equipment is a lot cheaper, while the labor is also very cheap. So maybe increasing supply wouldn't really be a hassle for us, and we can do so. So it would be very much feasible for us to increase supply very easily, and hence supply would be more responsive, and hence in that case supply would be more elastic. Got it? Another factor that you need to understand is the mobility of the factors of production. And you already know what mobility is. We covered that in chapter one. And, it's how easily factors of production can, move to other jobs. That is geographical mobility, while occupational mobility involves how easily factors of production could, be utilized in different productive uses, right? Or, maybe worker A is working in a particular occupation, then, maybe he's a I don't know, maybe if he's a banker, then, can he become a doctor? Well, no, he can't, right? I mean, it's going to take him a lot of time to do the trainings and go through that MBBS program and stuff like that. So, that's what labor mobility is. But overall, when you talk about mobility of the factors of production, you're referring to how easily factors of production, all the different kinds of factors of production can sort of be moved or be utilized in different, geographically be moved, or geographically be mobilized, or occupationally be mobilized in a different sense. So the more mobile the factors of production are, the more elastic the supply is likely to be. And this is because it will be reasonably easy for firms to increase their supply by, employing more factors of production. The more mobile the factors of production are, so the more mobile the factors of production are, the easier will the easier it will be for firms to, increase their supply by employing more factors of production, because they can easily employ those factors of production. And the reason why they can easily employ more factors of production is because more factors of production are easily available to be employed, because they are mobile and they can easily be used from either one, productive use to the other, or they are and slash or they are geographically mobile as well. So firms could easily employ them and utilize them for various stuff and various productive activities, and hence that would make the supply more elastic. But let's say that if it's very, very difficult for workers, for labor, for capital, for land, or for enterprise to move from, let's say, one occupation to another, or from one industry to another, or from one country to another, or from one city to another, or from one place to another, or from one productive use to another, then it will be difficult for firms to employ those factors of production, and hence the supply will be inelastic in this case. So the general rule is, to cut it short, guys, to just keep it simple, the general rule is that, the more mobile the factors of production are, the more elastic the supply is. The less mobile the factors of production are, the less elastic the supply is, or the more inelastic the supply is. The fourth factor that you need to know is the level of capacity. That is the level of available capacity, or the spare capacity that firms have. So imagine that, if let's go to, let's take another example of a tailor. And if, let's say, if I'm a tailor and I stitch clothes, then, if, let's say, during peak season, any time of the year could be, let's say, a peak season, and during peak season, if I have more customers and more demand is coming in, customers are willing to pay me higher prices even, then do I have available capacity or not? So if I have available capacity, meanings that if I have some spare capacity, I have some spare machines, a spare warehouse, a spare factory, a spare building, some idle workers who I can contact anytime and bring them on board, then the more available capacity or spare capacity or idle capacity I have, the more elastic the supply would be, because whenever demand really pops up or it increases, and so guys, see demand see, what is demand? What exactly is demand? Demand is the willingness and the ability to buy something, or you can say the willingness and ability to pay. So the demand is going up, definitely consumers would be willing to pay more, and that is why we see that market prices go up. So if market prices are going up, it's more incentive for the firms to supply more. That is why they end up supplying more. But the bigger question is, can they supply more? And that depends on elasticity. So it's also in the best interest of the firms to make their supply elastic. And the more spare capacity firms have, the more idle capacity firms have, the more easily they can increase supply. See, what I'm saying is, what is demand? Demand is the willingness and ability to buy something. Or, but another way to look at demand is the willingness and ability to pay. Hear me out. Another way to look at demand is the willingness and ability to pay. So if demand for something goes up, definitely you would be willing to pay more, and that is why you do end up paying more, because you see markets responding and reacting in that way that ultimately prices start going up. That is why we see that when demand goes up, prices in the market go up, because market knows as well that consumers are willing to pay more because demand is going up, right? So markets behave accordingly. The prices start going up. In response, producers need to increase supply then. And the more elastic the supply is, the easier will it be for the producers to increase supply. And also the beneficial it will be to increase supply, because when demand is going up and your supply is inelastic, what's the point then? You won't be able to match or cater to that demand. Anyways, coming back to the level of capacity factor, what we're saying is that if most of the factors of production are in use, let's say if most of them are in use, if you're working at full capacity, if firms are working at full capacity, means that most of the factors of production are in use, it will be difficult to increase production, and it will sort of restrict any increase in supply, making the supplies inelastic. But if there is more spare capacity available in the economy, or let's suppose the firms have more, let's not talk about the economy spare capacity, let's say if there's more spare capacity available for the firms, then firms would be easily be able to expand their output and increase their supply by recruiting or hiring all those unemployed idle resources available, right? So because you see, firms, it's not necessary that all the resources are being fully utilized at one point. Maybe if, let's say, the firm has 10 machines and 100 people on board, then not 100 people would be working at one time. Or let's say some people aren't really working because the firm doesn't have a lot of customers, the demand is low. But when demand peaks, and once the time comes when demand is going up, firms market prices are going up, it's now time to increase supply. That's the time where you need to sort of pull up your socks and work all day, all night. So definitely firms would increase supply, but then do they have the level of spare capacity? And if they have, then they would easily be able to increase supply to match demand. So right, so but if firms are working at, let's say, very less idle capacity, or let's say at max they're working at full capacity, then supply would be inelastic, right? So right guys, so but then if firms have resources that they're not using fully, right? Let's say firms have a few machines that they only end up using for only a few hours a day, and most of that time they're already lying idle, so firms could just use them to increase supply whenever the time comes and whenever they need them. So this is what we're saying. So again, the general rule is that the more spare capacity you have, the more elastic the supply would be, and vice versa. Moving forward, the fifth factor is that whether or not the product can be stored or not. So if the product can be stored, if your product can be stored, then the quantity supplied can be adjusted relatively easily whenever the demand goes up and price goes up. So if price goes up, so what usually firms do is that they invest in storage capacity. They end up getting warehouses, and they make their products and they store them there as buffer stock. See, they store them there. What I'm saying is they store them as buffer stock. Buffer means an extra stock. They store it. And once the prices rise in the market, then they would supply that from the warehouse, from the storage facilities that they have. So storage capacity always makes your supply elastic, because it gives you a platform to store the stock, and whenever price shoots up or demand shoots up and price shoots up, then you sort of pick out the stock from there and supply it in the market. Sweet and simple, pretty easy for you. So if the product can be stored, the quantity supplied can be adjusted relatively easily in the event of a price change, and the supply would be elastic, right? And also, let's say if let's say your stock is already available in the market, and if let's say the demand falls, and if demand falls, then market prices would fall. And if market prices would fall, you know that you need to contract quantity supplied now, because when demand falls, what happens when demand falls? But when demand sort of falls, then let's say that this is demand, this is supply, and when demand falls, what happens when demand shifts to the left? Market prices fall. And if market prices fall, you know that sort of quantity supplied contracts too, so you need to pull back your supply back, right? And so you could consider this as firm stock sort of taking some stock away from the market and storing it in the warehouse, because now they need to pull back that stock from the market because demand is low. One way to look at this is also, you can sort of think of it like this, that if the demand is falling and the price is falling, then firms will remove some of their products from the market and place them in storage. But if let's say subsequently the demand goes up and the price is rising, then the firm may start selling some of their stock from the storage back to, they may start supplying it back to the market. So if your product can be stored, remember, it will make your supply elastic, because your producers would be, your supply would be responsive then. Since it could be stored, you just need to open the doors of the warehouse, take the stuff from there, supply it in the market, right? Otherwise, if your product cannot be stored, then you would have, all the time whenever it's needed, you would have to make it again, and it could take some days to make it. But if it's already made and stored, you just need to pull it out from there and supply it in the market. And you can also pull back the stock from the market and put it in a warehouse or store it and save it whenever you want to need it later on, right? So, but let's say sometimes what happens is that some products are also by nature sort of perishable, like, maybe certain fruits or something, they have a certain shelf life. You could write this down. I haven't written this. You can write this down. I'll write this: shelf life. So if the shelf life is low, it means that you can't really store the product for a long time, right? And for example, certain food products, you can't really store them then for a long period of time. The product isn't really durable. It's going to lose out, it's going to get spoiled. So in that case, it's difficult to store the product, and that could, in that sense, you could say that the supply wouldn't be, I mean, whether the supply would be inelastic, that's debatable, but it won't be as elastic as it could be had the product been sold. But then calling it inelastic as well would be a bit not the right thing to do, because it depends upon how quickly that product can be made or not. If the product can be made easily and not really been available, it's not really available for storage, but it still can be made easily, then supply would be elastic. But then a better way to phrase it is that if the product is non-durable and it's sort of perishable and you can't really store it, then you can say that the supply would be less elastic, because you can't really produce in bulk and store it. So supply wouldn't be as responsive as it would have been had it been stored. Anyways, the other thing that you need to know is the time period involved, right? So the longer the time period, the more you see. So the more time you have, the time period involves mean the more time you have. So the more time, let's say I could use this as a teaching example. So first, what I'm saying is that the longer the time period, the more the opportunity the firms would have to alter the quantity of the factors of production they employ. So they will have enough time to alter land, labor, capital, and hence supply would be more responsive and more elastic. And maybe if they need to change some of their production methods, maybe get more capital or on board and fire some of the workers, or maybe sort of change their production mix, maybe use a different mix of labor and capital. Instead, they were using less labor, more capital, but now they realize that we need to use more labor, less capital. So they will have enough time to figure their shit out, right? That's what I'm saying, to figure all their mess out. And so what that means is that the more the time period is available to them, or at their disposal, the more time there is at their disposal, sorry, the more elastic the supply would be. And same is it with me in my case, that if a student is joining just in the end, a month before, I wouldn't take him on board, because I don't really have the time to cover a syllabus. So the more time I have, the more willing I would be to cater more students, and the more elastic my services would be. Another thing is the depletion of natural resources. Just like, when in the first point we talked about availability of resources, but then if resources, especially when we talk about natural resources, you know what natural resources are. So, a lot of the goods are dependent upon natural resources, right? Fuel is made from oil, right? And natural resources, all the resources that are made, that exist naturally, that are not man made. We're talking about natural resources, the minerals, the oil, the water, the land, the soil, copper, coal. These are all natural resources, and so if they start depleting, right? If they start depleting, and so if natural resources, the guys are being depleted, then it becomes increasingly difficult for almost all the industries in the economy. It's not just one particular firm. It's not just we're talking about a tailor or a shoemaker or a car manufacturer. I mean, technically, this point is applicable for almost all the industries in the economy that use natural resources in one form or the other for supply and production. So if natural resources are being depleted, it becomes increasingly difficult to extend or increase supply of those products that use those natural resources, right? So supply would become inelastic. The more the natural resources deplete over time, the more inelastic the supply gets. Also, guys, remember that it is in the best interest of the firms, it is in the best interest of the firms to make their supply elastic. And how could they make their supply elastic? By maybe giving training to the workers to that makes them more occupationally mobile, by investing in spare capacity, by investing in capital equipment, by investing in technology, by making sure that they have some form of idle capacity available at their disposal as well. Investing in storage capacity, investing in education and training by making their labor more occupationally mobile, let's say, so that or I mean or let's say by improving the shelf life of the product as well, right? Also, they could make their supply elastic. I haven't really written this here, but write this down. By having multiple contacts, multiple this is a point that is usually written in the marketing schemes, by the way. Having multiple contacts with vendors, of raw material, let's say. So if the one raw material vendor sort of backs out or ditches you in the end, then you have multiple raw material suppliers at your disposal. So this is another way that you could sort of make your supply more elastic over time, and or by improving shelf life of your product, so that the product becomes more durable over the longer period. And you could sort of store it as well, investing in storage capacity. Or you could say you can make your supply more elastic by investing in capital equipment, investing in and the reason why I'm saying investing in capital equipment is because capital equipment sort of improves the efficiency of output, right? Efficiency of production. So efficiency of production would improve, and you would be able to sort of produce more in less time, which will make your supply obviously more responsive and make your supply more elastic. And you can also bring in technology here as well, the role of technology. And the role of technology is also, the more technologically sophisticated and advanced you are, the more technologically advanced your whole production processes are, then and the more technical latest technology and equipment the factories are using, the more elastic the production would be, especially as if you are in the manufacturing sector. So if you're in the manufacturing sector, you must invest in technology, you must invest in latest capital equipment to make sure that your supply is elastic, right? So what I was saying was that it is in the best interest of the firms to make their supply elastic, because what will happen is that whenever demand will increase, so if the demand for the product will increase, subsequently demand increasing means consumers are willing to pay more now because the demand is going up, so market prices will go up. And when market prices goes up, all eyes are on the firm. Can the firms cater to that demand or not? What if the firms can't really cater to the demand? Is all the time you see a burger shop. I mean, so let's say that you are running a bakery, and all the time you're going to that bakery and you want that particular, let's say, Nutella cake or something, and all the time they're like, oh, you know what, we're closed, we're out of stock, come tomorrow, come tomorrow. But what if the bakery just told you, oh, we're out of stock, but just wait for 5 minutes, a cake would be on your way in 5 minutes. Just wait outside or wait inside. Just sit down on the bench and just wait for 5 minutes. So it means your supply for cakes is elastic, right? Or maybe they have already, you don't see the cake on the shelf, but it's back in the freezer. They've stored it in over there. So again, these are the things that I want you to think of in these terms, right? So what you're saying is that it is in the best interest of the firms to make the supply more price elastic, because when demand goes up and price goes up, then firms can quickly increase supply by easily increasing supply. And the more elastic the supply is, the easier it is for firms to respond to rising demand in the market. The quicker and the easier it will be for them to respond to increasing demand, and the more customers they would end up satisfying, and pretty honestly, the more revenues they would be ending up making as well. So that's it, guys. We've ended this topic. And by the way, I've attached these two scripts, these two extracts, not scripts, these two extracts from your course book. Just go through them. You won't really need me to explain this. This is pretty much self-explanatory. Just go through it, right? And in the course of time, you will see more of these extracts being attached. All the relevant stuff I usually do, that I feel that I want you to go through from this particular book or that particular book. I extract the relevant things and I just attach here, that you can go through it yourself as well. Okay, guys, so we're done with this, and that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, take care.